we think that in a physical context, there is still more work to be done for these robots to surpass humans. And part of that may just have to do with the type of data that's available. But essentially, in order for humanoid robots to be truly trustworthy, you need very low error and rapid reasoning that exceeds human performance. I think that is typically a benchmark that we have for automation technologies. They should be better than us. Now, the rate of improvement around that, we think is fast. It's exponential. It's improving faster than expected, every year.
Hi. Wherever you're joining me, I hope you're doing well. Welcome to India Tech Report, a platform dedicated to chronicling and supporting the growth of India's deep tech and climate tech ecosystems, one conversation at a time. I'm Hari Arakli, and in this episode, we explore the rapidly evolving world of physical intelligence with Arjun Dutt, a partner at Bain Company and a former entrepreneur himself. As generative AI transitions from digital interfaces into the physical world, Arjun explains why humanoid robots are emerging as a solution to the worsening labor shortages, especially in the so-called brownfield plants in many advanced economies. We dive into Bain's 4-point definition of humanoids: adaptive intelligence, spatial perception, bipedal dexterity, and sustained power, and talk about how the current battery technologies remain the long pole in the tent for true autonomy. He outlines the 3 waves of adoption that were discussed in a recent note that Arjun co-authored, predicting that while industrial brownfield settings will see scale within 3 to 5 years, consumer-centric home robots are at least a decade away. You'll also find interesting insights on the following topics: the role of generative AI as a foundational capability, allowing robots to learn via observation and training data rather than rigid scenario-based programming, the evolution of specific task-oriented robots versus truly general-purpose humanoids, and where might the eventual control points lie, as Arjun puts it, of humanoid robots, meaning who will control most of the critical technologies in these robots. Lastly, we touched upon his advice for India's deep tech entrepreneurs, discussing the merits of going narrow and how to navigate the reliability and regulatory hurdles of the US market. So let's go. So Arjun, thank you for making time for this. Really excited to have you on India Tech Report. It's absolutely fantastic to have an expert like you to talk about robotics today predominantly, and your recent notes that you have co-authored on how you all expect robotics to be adopted in the coming months and years. And for our audience, I'll also mention that Arjun has previously been an entrepreneur himself, and as we go along, we will probably ask him a few questions about that as well, takeaways from his entrepreneurial experience in the context of how India's deep tech and specifically robotics companies can navigate some of the challenges of what folks call go-to-market in the global scenario these days. So enough of me talking. Arjun, let's dive into this. Maybe you want to take a minute just to give us a sense of the conversation you all had before you came up with this note on robotics. And along the way, maybe also talk us through Bain's definition of humanoid robots as of today, and let's go from there.
Sounds great, Hari. Thank you for having me. Huge fan of what you're doing, and excited to have an opportunity to speak with you and spend some time on this topic with you. To your question, I think we started thinking about the humanoid robotics topic probably in late 2024, early 2025. It just seemed like, generative AI had really had such a breakthrough moment and was proving capabilities to advance, all of tech at a rate that we hadn't seen, in sort of previous waves. It started to feel inevitable that this technology would become more and more relevant to AI and kind of tasks in the physical world. And so in early 2025 is actually when we started to think about, what do we think is going to happen in the world of kind of physical automation, and what does AI and the advent of generative AI really mean there. So that's really what got us thinking and about this topic, and what sort of inspired us to write a couple of different pieces about this and really dig into this. We also found that our clients were starting to ask us more and more about, hey, what's next after kind of generative AI and kind of the chat interface? And there's obviously a pretty exciting startup ecosystem that's been forming around robotics. It's not a new domain, obviously. If you remember, um, almost a decade ago, one of the big tech companies in Silicon Valley had bought up probably close to a dozen different robotics companies, and then ended up spinning them back out. So this topic of like physical intelligence has been around in Silicon Valley for a long time, but I think people have found that the physical challenges have been very hard to solve. And the general intelligence challenges have been very hard to solve. So, part of your second question was really, how do we think about what these kind of humanoid robots are? Many of those capabilities seem like they've become much more viable and within reach. So as we think about, and as we sort of define humanoid robotics, we really focused on, I would say probably four key aspects of what kind of makes a humanoid robot kind of fit within the category. One is that they must be intelligent. So they must have an adaptive, intelligent brain that allows a robot to sort of, make decisions about what it's interacting with in the real world. The second is that they must have some perception capabilities. So they must have spatial awareness, awareness of objects, people around them, in order to then make some decisions. They must have, dexterous handling, and so this we actually meant both from the perspective of like a robot's hands. As you've probably seen, there are grippers, there are fully dexterous, multi-digit hands, but they must also be bipedal. So they should have like two legs and be able to sort of walk around, without needing a conveyor belt or something like that. And the fourth kind of important category that we felt was important to a humanoid robot was that they must have the ability to power themselves for long enough to be able to do useful work. So whether that's a battery or some other form of power, that was a key core element as well. So those was kind of the four, which is really kind of a useful level of intelligence, powerful perception of the environment around them, the capability to sort of move around freely in an environment and interact with it from a handling perspective, and then have the ability to have sustained power. So that's how we sort of thought about it. And then obviously there were a lot of exciting developments that were happening, late in 2024, early in 2025, that really got us to spend some time on this topic.
Okay, very nice. Briefly, one quick follow-on question on the mention of the generative AI aspect. I have, of course, come across this reporting on the subject that often people are talking about generative AI alongside robotics. But maybe can you explain to us just take a couple of minutes, briefly talk about why that is so? What is the relevance of generative AI to something physical and hardware like robotics? Of course, there is physical AI in robotics.
Yeah, it's a really good question. The way I think about this is it's the core foundational capability that enables robots to be able to do useful work more quickly. So if you look at sort of the historical, paradigm of how do you get a device to do a useful set of tasks, you would usually use some sort of heuristic programming, or think about many different scenarios and essentially make predeterminations about how your robot or your physical object would behave in different scenarios. The difference in the paradigm is that now, because you can have algorithms that learn from observation, so from training data, from seeing a set of inputs and outputs, being able to generalize more broadly beyond that, this sort of becomes a foundational capability around kind of intelligence of a physical robot. So instead of saying, if you encounter scenario X, do 7 sets of things, you can show the robot or the robot algorithm, video of what the scenario looks like, and you can show the actions that that the robot should take. And then you can either do this in the physical, collecting actual data, or even kind of synthetic or generated data. And so that becomes sort of a big unlock for these robotic technologies, is that now you don't need to go and generate every single, or you could generate every single scenario, but you don't need to collect every single piece of data. You don't need to program every single scenario. You can actually have systems that start to learn from observing the environment, from interacting with the environment.
Okay, so just in order to complete the context a little bit more, before we get into discussing the note that you all have written, this might be a little bit of an obvious question, but I feel it's worth asking. In the industrial automation context, particularly, of course, Hollywood movies have popularized robots in many different scenarios, in homes and combat and whatnot. But in factory automation, warehouse automation, supply chain, and things like that, what is really the attraction of humanoids? Why are people investing so much effort and, many, many billions of dollars in developing robots for these kinds of applications? My question is basically, are humanoids inherently better in these environments for various different applications that other form factors probably are not, or so on?
It's a great question, Hari. It's one that we were asking ourselves as well when we started to look at this space. So I kind of want to answer it from two different perspectives. One is that, the reason we think humanoid robots are attractive is that if you look kind of globally, there is a real decline that people are anticipating in the labor force. And so if you look at markets like Germany, China, Japan, even the US, just the rate of growth of available labor has either been declining or flattening for a very long time. So that's one, is that people are just anticipating sort of a potential shortage of workers to be able to do the types of tasks that we have come to see as either crucial or important for moving economies forward. The other is that if you look at many kind of industrial contexts today, you see still, while there is a lot of automation, you'll see, very large robots or robotic lines in place. You still see an important role for humans that humans play, because some tasks are just a bit more unstructured. Some tasks require moving between different robotic lines. And, in order to be able to have a complete, end-to-end automation of some of these, you sort of really think of these as what is quote unquote called brownfield settings, where it's, a setting that is suitable for a human. It already exists, and you would need to do a lot of work in order to get some non-human form factor to be able to do productive work in there. So the idea of being able to, when confronted with labor shortages, to be able to have some sort of automation that can still make these brownfield settings productive, I think that's a powerful motivation for humanoid robots. Now, to be clear, I don't think humanoid robots are a panacea for automation. So if you look at what these humanoid robots can do, typically, while they will be intelligent, they can have more sort of dexterous handling. They have the ability to communicate sort of in speech. They can kind of move around. Their ability to carry a payload, so carry an object or move an object, is more limited relative to, say, an industrial robot, which can lift up to a ton. Many mobile robots can do this as well, but humanoid robots today are probably limited to under 20 or 30 kilograms of weight that they can move. And so to that extent, they may start to approach a little bit of what human capabilities are. They're not perfect for everything, but they are very useful in sort of these brownfield settings. So you can still use your capital investment that you've made in an existing factory or warehouse infrastructure, just with a new form factor of worker.
Okay, so let's dive into the note, the really interesting note that you all have written, and I love the infographic which talks about how different things are going to change, including the bill of materials of the various components that are going to go into the humanoids. Can you walk us through what you've called the 3 waves in which you expect adoption of humanoids to happen?
Yeah, absolutely. So, there's probably a deeper discussion, and maybe we can get into it in a little bit, just around what are the capabilities that these robots need. As I mentioned, there are these sort of four elements that we use to define what a humanoid robot is. Across intelligence, perception, their handling capabilities, and sort of their ability to have sustained power. All of those we think have an implication as to what use cases, what applications become viable and when. Um, and so the general waves that we've really thought about is wave one, we really think is sort of more of an industrial context. So in these more brownfield settings where there is a lot of automation, where they're controlled, closed environments, you can see kind of more degrees of freedom for a robot being able to do different tasks safely. We think wave two is kind of starting to get more into the open world with potentially applications like mining or construction, where these can still be slightly more controlled settings while being more open. There aren't always walls in a construction site, for example, but they're generally more dedicated spaces where you don't have an unpredictable number of human interaction, etc. So we think that that's probably like a wave two. Uh, and then wave three is probably more consumer oriented, more consumer centric, whether this is around the cleaning robots that all of us probably want in our homes, or a healthcare or social assistance type of robot, or even applications around hospitality or education. So we really think that is probably wave three. And there are different underpinning reasons, even beyond sort of the closeness or the openness of the environment, that we should probably talk about. But those are fundamentally the three waves. Wave one is kind of an industrial wave. Wave two is more of a, probably still more industrial applications, but starting to move into things like mining and construction. And then wave three is more kind of open consumer-centric applications.
Okay. And can you give us a sense of your estimates in terms of the timeline for these three waves? And I just want to add a very brief observation. I stumbled upon this Scientific American news article, I think, today. I forget the name of the roboticist in the US. He came up with the robotics Olympics challenge, a set of different tasks from sort of easy ones to difficult ones, I think, like bronze to gold and things like that. From simple things like turning a doorknob to more complex ones like buttoning a dress. And apparently there is some evidence that robots are learning faster than we expected. And I think now he has come up with another set of more difficult challenges. So it was very interesting to read. And I just wanted to throw in that conversation before asking my question. What kind of timelines are you looking at?
Yeah, I mean that's a super interesting kind of point. I guess I'm not that surprised to hear that the rate of progress is even faster, than we had expected. I think this is also a similar trend to what we've seen in kind of generative AI. The capabilities of these technologies have moved way faster. There's constantly a new benchmark that's needed in order to be able to test the current state of the art. So in fact, it's pretty encouraging to hear that this is proving out in kind of physical kind of manipulation and automation as well. So the general timelines that we see, we still think that we are probably at least 3 to 5 years out from even scale applications within an industrial setting. And again, as said, we can talk a little bit about kind of what we see as the limitations today. I think the next wave after that, so call it maybe 2030 and beyond, is where we see kind of the wave two really happening. So around construction and probably other industrial applications as well, with mining. And then wave three, we see as probably being 10 plus years out, which is starting to get more in the consumer-centric applications, really robots in the home, robots in a healthcare setting. Could this happen within the next 7 or 8 years? Yeah, possibly. There's probably big error bars around this sort of timing prediction, but that's essentially how we see it. Within the next 3 to 5 years, we see sort of the more industrial applications. Say in the next 5 to 10 years, we see more, the construction, mining, kind of second wave of applications, and then beyond that is where we really see the consumer applications starting to scale up.
Okay. So let's dive a little bit into the capabilities that you all have looked at. What
Mhm.
would you say today is the state of the art in the most important capabilities and technologies that go into
Mhm.
the making of humanoid as we know them today? Um, and maybe you can give us a sense of how that state of the art is evolving pretty much on a daily basis, I would imagine. Everything from advanced materials to software, of course. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, let's go with that.
Yeah, I mean, robots are pretty complex systems, and humanoid robots are, even more so. As we've thought about it, the four core capabilities and kind of where they are today. So, intelligence, perception, dexterity or handling, and then the power capabilities is really how I think about where the robots are today. So, from an intelligence standpoint, as you've seen with generative AI, I think. Um, on knowledge tasks, we've seen robots, sort of algorithms outperform humans in many cases. We think that in a physical context, there is still more work to be done for these robots to surpass humans. And part of that may just have to do with the type of data that's available. But essentially, in order for humanoid robots to be truly trustworthy, you need very low error and rapid reasoning that exceeds human performance. I think that is typically a benchmark that we have for automation technologies. Is that they should be better than us. Now, the rate of improvement around that, we think is fast. It's exponential. It's improving faster than expected. Every year we think that the capability will probably be there from an intelligence and reasoning standpoint for robots within 2 to 3 years. From a perception standpoint, which is just being able to have awareness of your surroundings, whether with vision or other sensing capabilities, um, there are some superhuman sensing capabilities that robots can have, but I think the combination of all of the sensors, we would say, is probably still slightly below the threshold of human level vision, sensing, real, and also being able to factor into real time decision making with like super low latency. Again, we think the rate of change here is exponential, and will probably reach or surpass human level capabilities in a physical robot within 2 to 3 years. So both of these we think are moving extremely fast, but they're very important capabilities. The third, which is around the dexterity and handling, which is more sort of fine manipulation, and we should talk about how fine manipulation is truly needed. But if the benchmark is similar to a human hand, 27 degrees of freedom with tactile feedback. This is still far below human capabilities. I think companies have been announcing robots with hands with 22 degrees of freedom. We think this will improve, but the last mile is probably going to be harder to solve than people anticipate. I'm encouraged to hear about the article that you mentioned around Scientific American, because some of those tasks sound like really fine-grained handling tasks. But my estimate there is the rate of improvement will be a little bit more challenging than with intelligence and perception. Probably within about 5 years, you'll start to see this breakthrough. Um, and then truly, what we would call the long pole in the tent, the hardest problem to solve as we see it is probably the power, the battery capacity, the battery density that is needed to support robot performance. Today, most robots that we have seen have maybe between 2 and 4 hours of battery life. If you look at battery technology, most of the battery technology is not that new. It's been around for 30 plus years. The rate of improvement is fairly slow. And so this is what we think is a true gating factor for having a humanoid robot that can work, uninterrupted for say 8+ hours. We think that this is 5 to 10 years out, and the rate of improvement is probably going to lag the other three areas. Now, if there's some major breakthrough on battery density, battery technology capability, this would likely change all of the timelines. But from the data that we have seen, this is probably the gating factor around what it will take to get these robots to truly break through.
Okay. When you spoke about the ways you mentioned some of this, I just want to
Mhm.
get a couple more minutes from you on which
Mhm.
sectors you think will be early adopters. Of course, everybody is definitely talking about automakers, and there are a lot of numbers around how less than 10% of tasks are automated and whatnot. But give us a sense of what you think is happening, what you're seeing happening, which
Yeah.
sectors.
Yeah. So a good question. So what we have seen in terms of real data of like where robot companies, robot makers are finding traction with their pilots is in these industrial settings. So it's either in durable manufacturing, like for automation, um, for automotive. I'm sorry, or in third party logistics like warehousing. So that is where we see squarely as kind of the early adopter. This is where we're seeing a lot of robotics companies engaging in pilots. I suspect that the next wave, this whole wave will really be about these kind of industrial kind of warehouse type settings, at least for the next 2 to 3 years. I think beyond that, as said, applications like construction and mining could become more viable. That's probably say 5+ years out. And then beyond that, we see, an acute shortage, for example, of human workers in healthcare services. So as the capabilities increase, as trust in robots increase, more consumer-like settings like healthcare applications or even in the home is kind of what you'll see. So, yeah.
Okay. Just off the top of your mind, any standout examples in recent times or this year of interesting partnerships that give us a sense of how some of these deployments are, if not already moving into real world scenarios, they're very much on the cusp of going from pilot programs to real world applications in factories and warehouses.
Yeah. I think we've seen some announcements. Generally, from the work that I've done, really kind of digging into where are these today. Most of the ones that I've come across are still in pilot stage, with quite a bit of work to be done before kind of true scale up is achieved. Sometimes you'll see, the pilots will still have teleworkers that are controlling the robots. So, from my perspective, and I'm not aware of every single deployment that's happening today, but most of the deployments are still in the pilot stage. And I don't yet see anything today, and this just might be kind of my level of awareness, where I'm convinced that okay, we are truly at the breakout moment for a scale application today. Lots of interesting pilots. Still some work to be done to really prove out the value at scale.
The most recent one is still on my mind. I think Toyota's deal with Agility recently to put some robots in one of their Canadian facilities. Sometime back, I read about Siemens doing some really interesting work. And I think BMW, after a 10-month project in the US, are now bringing physical AI and robotics to one of their plants in Leipzig, I think, if I'm not mistaken. And that one caught my attention also because they mentioned both physical AI and robots. And as you mentioned, there are still pilots. And I'm just sort of mentioning this more from the point of view of giving some examples to our audience. And I wanted to bring it back to you to ask you about. Of course, you would have seen all these news announcements. What type of functions do you think these companies are initially targeting?
Yeah, so most of these pilots that I'm familiar with, some of this has to do with things like tasks like kitting, where you have a robot sort of pick different parts that are needed for a task. That is a pretty typical kind of use case that we've seen across some of the pilots that you mentioned. Sometimes we see in a third party logistics or warehouse setting, things like parcel sorting or even pallet loading. These are some of the tasks you'll sometimes see robots even doing short over a short distance, moving a cart. So it's really a lot of picking and packing, picking and sorting of parts. Moving of kind of carts over short distances. We do even beyond the warehouse and factory settings, see things like security patrols or just kind of there's some very early kind of examples of robots lifting and carrying patients. You might have seen some of the videos, but again, I think more proof of concept than any kind of even scale pilot.
Just to ask one or two questions on the training side of things.
Sure.
What what is today sort of the I mean, I don't know if there is a consensus yet on how robots are to be trained, but what are
Yeah.
you seeing that is really exciting? What's the state of the art with respect to how what is working in training robots?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, it's an incredibly dynamic space. A few years ago, there was no mention of VLAs or different types of models. Um, at least as I've sort of seen it, these kind of general foundation models, that you see in generative AI more broadly is one key kind of underlying robot training capability that we see. You have a pre-built model, you're able to sort of fine tune that using some examples for a specific task. So that's one. The other is, some sort of learning from some human imitation. So either watching through video, or learning from a teleoperator's kind of actions. What is a set of tasks? These robots are then able to sort of learn these and kind of generalize. Um, Simulation seems like a really exciting one where robots can actually learn in a virtual world and they can learn very quickly at massive scale. And so once you have a simulated robot that learns how to do a task in a virtual environment, you can then kind of deploy that intelligence within the actual physical robots on the edge devices themselves, as you would. And then we see kind of more interest and some folks starting to work on things like world models. So starting to embody all of the physical world in a model or a set of models or a synthetic or virtual world. That's basically not obviates the need for having real physical examples being collected where you essentially uh, have a virtual world that has all of the properties of the physical world, and then the robots can learn either through from many of these other techniques, but within this other kind of virtual environment that really simulates and synthesizes everything that you see kind of around us.
Okay, I'm going to throw out this more sort of direct question. You've mentioned parts of this through the course of this conversation so far, but how far away would you say we are from a truly general purpose humanoid robot?
A truly general purpose, as we've been chatting about, I think if you think about the four different dimensions of what makes a capable humanoid robot, so the intelligence, the perception, the handling, and the power capabilities, I suspect that is probably 8 to 10 years out. I think given the rate of improvement of the underlying technologies, I suspect that intelligence and perception will meet or exceed human capabilities within 2 to 3 years. I suspect that the handling capabilities probably soon after, maybe within about 5 years. But the self-sustaining sort of power capabilities is again the long pole in the tent, and that's really what pushes the highlight out.
And do you see evidence of any type of preference amongst the companies that are making robots, that are making the so-called physical AI or the intelligence
Mhm,
software algorithms and so on?
mhm,
What are they focusing on? Are they looking to build more specific task-oriented robots initially,
mhm,
probably to sort of hasten the commercialization process,
mhm.
or is the general purpose aspect the most attractive one to the companies
Yeah.
that are actually building these technologies?
Yeah. I mean, I think that this is a super interesting question. This is probably one that's going to define um, who is sort of successful, in the sort of first wave or, one of these early major waves of kind of humanoid robot development. I see two distinct types of approaches. So I think everyone's goal ultimately is kind of a general purpose humanoid robot, one that can do any task that a human can do in any setting. The two approaches that I am seeing, um, you know, different companies in this space pursue. One really starts with concrete, specific use cases in a kind of potentially closed environment, but trying to do human-like tasks. So, these are the examples that some of the examples that you were mentioning, which are things like in a car factory, can I apply this humanoid robot to do a very specific task like part kitting or palletizing or things like that. But on the other hand, we see examples of companies who have a much bigger ambition, and they're or a very different way of going after this bigger ambition, which is to say, let me try and solve general purpose tasks first. And if I can solve those, then I know that I'll be able to solve specific tasks like picking the right parts for a kit or something, or putting an object on a pallet. So I see actually a divergence in the approaches that the companies at the forefront, at the edge of this, are really following. Some taking this very like use case led, let's go narrow, let's focus on one problem, let's solve that problem, and then extend beyond that, to others that are saying, let's solve general robotic intelligence and robotic capability first in a more unconstrained setting, because that is going to be the fastest path to getting the data, getting the learning cycles, proving out the viability of the robot, before we bring it into more kind of structured industrial settings.
Okay. Can you talk us through what you see as the most difficult challenges in the way of faster adoption today? I know you've mentioned factors like energy density in today's battery cells and so on, and I would imagine, therefore, things like the weight of the battery and whatnot will all those things and go into the form factor. And we also know that what is considered very intuitive to even a human child today can be very, very complex to make a robot perform well. So give us a sense of what you are seeing as the big challenges in the way of adoption, faster adoption.
Yeah. So I think we've probably talked about some of the technical or capability limitations. One of the things that we haven't talked about is kind of sort of the role of one, human factors, and then the second being regulatory factors. So it's I think if you look at the history of robotic technologies, it's not enough for the robots themselves to have the set of capabilities that you need in order for them to do useful work. Anytime you're deploying a technology in a brownfield setting where they have to be around humans, there are all sorts of adoption constraints. You have to be able to consider, do people trust the technology? Is the technology perceived to be safe? Is a technology perceived to be a threat to your livelihood? And so these are kind of real human factors, essentially public trust issues that will need to be addressed before you, I think, truly start to see robots operating at scale in an industrial setting, or even in a consumer setting, or really anywhere at sort of scale. The other is sort of the regulatory aspect of it. So different institutions, different governments will have a different view on how quickly they want this robotic technology to sort of permeate. And so, depending on how permissive or restrictive either the labor policies or the technology policies or data privacy policies are, this could also be kind of a governor or a rate limiter on the rate of sort of proliferation of robotic technology, independent of the technical capability.
And what you're seeing in terms of how the intelligence aspect of robots is evolving, in the sense of who do you think eventually will own that stack? Will it be the same company as the one that makes the hardware robot? Will it be a company like Google or Microsoft, or is there also an open source possibility here, potential for such kind of technology stacks? What are you seeing in terms of how all of this is evolving?
Yeah, that's a really tricky one to answer, just because how early we are in sort of this cycle. So, as you know, robots are a pretty complex system, right? There's an intelligence layer to it, but that intelligence layer, again, is probably separated between the compute, the compute hardware capability, and the algorithmic software capability. There's an operating system. There's all these mechatronic components to it. There are all these like rolling screws that really control the robot performance. There's assembly and manufacturing of the robots themselves that has to happen. There's probably software integration work that has to happen. There's servicing of robots that has to happen once they're in the field. Um, if the ultimate question is around, where are the control points, in the robot stack, intelligence is probably one of them. Will one company own it all? It's hard to say. Today, it does seem like most of the compute runs on NVIDIA technology, but I think there have been recent announcements about Qualcomm and others also starting to develop offerings, for chips that can power kind of robot intelligence. There are algorithmic approaches, whether it's the cognitive model or the physical model. And there you see different companies using different approaches. Some of them are building the entire software stack in-house, including the operating system. Others are partnering, so they will partner with, say, like a DeepMind or another third party for parts of these capabilities. They'll build part of this in-house. So I think different companies are seeing different parts of the stack as a core capability that differentiates them and their capability. It's an incredibly dynamic, evolving field. Today, I think in the interest of speed, most of the examples that I see rely on some third party, either a partnership or using an open source tool. But we see some strong examples of people truly building full stack, from the compute layer all the way to algorithms and even sort of, assembly, all kind of in-house. It's early innings, so hard to say which one will be the winning strategy. If you look at other parts of other technology markets, you do generally start to see consolidation of some of these capabilities into one or two companies that own, but where scale matters, that's really where you start to see, the industry economics favoring, more consolidation. I think at the software layer, we've seen many examples of more and more operating systems being pushed to being open source. This is a very developer oriented, developer first sort of technology. So, that's just kind of that's a little bit of what informed my intuition around where this will go. Ultimately, it will depend on what is actually the winning approach to building a full system that is successful and solves the whole problem. So that is probably innings 3, 4, 5. There's a lot more that needs to happen in order to have a good view of this. But clearly, it seems to be a very vibrant ecosystem with a lot of folks entering because they see the potential. It's inspiring to imagine creating a robot that can do anything in the world. And so you see a lot of energy and investment going into this.
I'm going to try and slip in a couple of quick questions and also switch to what I referred to earlier on, the top of the conversation, some insights from your experience for Indian robotics entrepreneurs. Obviously, they don't have the kind of funding, and there are even some know-how challenges. When you compare them with the very big companies in Silicon Valley, like Figure and so on. So, to your mind, what are the spaces where you think entrepreneurs out of India can really make a significant difference?
Great question. So I think if fundamentally your question is about like, hey, what are some smart capital light ways to pursue this opportunity? I think I would say probably four priorities, at least on my mind. One is, and this can be controversial. My instinct is to go narrow. As a former entrepreneur, as you said, I think when you focus on a specific concrete, narrow problem, you can start to decompose it into smaller problems. It's a classic sort of entrepreneurial way to go after something very specific that has a real pain point, one environment, and be able to show some progress and some wins. The second, as we were talking about, the capabilities of these robots, the handling capabilities, the bipedal capabilities, they are important defining characteristics of a humanoid robot, but they also add a lot of cost. So I think if there's a way to take a hybrid approach, either using wheels or using a gripper instead of hands, and still solve the problem, that could be a practical way to deliver a solution without, really sticking close to this vision of the perfect humanoid robot. The third would be, trying to figure out where there's smart ways to partner. So instead of owning the whole stack, as the conversation we were just having, are there ways to use a third party's intelligence capabilities or assembly capabilities, um, or even their distribution capabilities to be able to get your product to market faster and at scale. And then the final thing I would say is, back to this control point conversation we were having, really being thoughtful about, is there one, you know, technical problem or one part of the stack that everyone is going to need to solve, and it lends itself well to being served by a third party. Find what those are, and maybe invest some time and energy into seeing if you and your company can solve those problems.
For Indian deep tech companies in general,
Mhm.
are there any important challenges in how they navigate? What are some of the big things that they need to keep in mind when they want to grow their sales engine in the US?
Yeah. Good question. I think, for me, fundamentally, this is a systems and a hardware business, right? And so scaling some of these up essentially requires being able to prove the value consistently and over time in the field. So I think the most important things that jump out to me that will be important for scaling up, whether in the US or some other global market, is one is kind of just the reliability and quality of the product in the field. So, just performance, safety, um, you know, uh, managing sort of failure rates. I think this is going to be a crucial aspect of being able to actually scale, build on your wins. The second, more from an internal perspective, is really going to be around internally scaling your manufacturing and production. This is, going from many pilots to many scale deployments requires a step change in your manufacturing and operations, which most companies will at some point struggle with, but being able to manage through that, being able to manage your unit economics, the cost to actually deliver a fully functioning product in the field is going to be a critical one to maintain your competitive edge. Um, I think from a go-to-market standpoint, just being able to do the implementation work, do the after-sales service and support. There'll be IT, OT integration that's needed in the field. So having the right either presence or partner network to be able to address those, make sure that your customers feel well taken care of, they know who to call, and they're good SLAs in kind of response time. I think that would be a critical aspect of kind of go to market beyond you know landing the initial sale. um, and then finally being able to navigate kind of the complex regulatory fabric of the world today. So what there anytime you have any automation, there are labor regulations, of course, but there will also be data privacy regulations when you have systems that have so many different perception capabilities in the field. So data privacy, data residency, being able to sort of manage that, have the right infrastructure to be able to support that at scale. Those are the ones that strike me as being really important. So maintaining your reliability and quality of your product at scale, being able to manage your costs and unit economics at scale, making sure that your customers get the right level of support and touch, post initial sale, and then navigating the regulatory landscape in order to have a healthy, scaling, growing business.
Okay, so let me end with the following question. I know, of course, and I won't ask you to give us any specifics, but in sort of general, broad terms, I would imagine Bain is advising many of the very large technology buyers around the world. What are you seeing them do today in terms of their automation strategies, and more specifically, humanoid purchase strategies? And what are you telling them?
Yeah, great question. This is a topic that many of our clients are thinking about. It is candidly in very early days in their mind, but many of our clients, whether they're in distribution or food service or large scale manufacturing, are all thinking about what is the role that humanoid robots could play in my environment? Is it in the factory? Is it in a warehouse? Is it in the field? So that's one angle that they're all thinking about. The other is what are the set of capabilities that are no regrets today? So is it our IT capabilities? Is it our operational tech? Our sort of warehouse software? What are the capabilities that need to be pushed forward or advanced that will be no regrets for us when we are trying to confront an opportunity to kind of work with robots. And then the other kind of practical question that we see a lot of them wrestling with is, how do we get started? Do we do a pilot with someone? Do we set up some sort of team that can engage with the startup ecosystem to learn what is the state of the art today? How do we start to identify what are the capabilities that we will need to change? What are the human factors issues we will need to change and evolve in order to take advantage of the innovation that's happening at such a rapid rate beyond us? So those are the typical conversations that we have with our clients.
Okay,
but
fantastic.
Evolving very quickly. Yeah.
No, please go on. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No. I just wanted to say, it's evolving very quickly, as you can imagine. Every week or every month, there's a brand new demo that really kind of changes the way people think about the possibility of what this technology can do. So it's very exciting, and it's definitely keeping many of our executives on their toes.
Okay, wonderful, fantastic. And Arjun, thank you so much for making time to do this with me today. And I definitely hope we can keep the conversation going.
Thanks, Hari. It was a pleasure.
That's it for this conversation. You'll find the links to Arjun's bio and the Bain Company note on the likely impact of early commercialization of humanoid robots in the description. To support my work, please subscribe to my posts right here or at indiatechreport.in. I'm Hari Artli. Thank you for joining me.